Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. To put things in perspective, and what would I be putting in perspective? Well, that one thing that everyone is talking about, the end of the world. Here's Oprah Winfrey. Now, I'll just introduce this quotation by letting you know that 5 days ago, Oprah tweeted, "People of the world, let's listen to Dr. Marco Vergano and stay home." That's what everyone's telling us. Stay home. People are hell. Every other person on earth is a possible fatal threat to you. So say the experts. Well, Oprah has been close to the experts for decades. And this is what she said on her show on February the 18th, 1987. Quote, "Research studies now project that 1 in 5, listen to me, hard to believe, 1 in 5 heterosexuals could be dead from AIDS at the end of the next 3 years," unquote. Now, a lot of people were saying things like that in the 1980s. Michael Fumento wrote a book called The Myth of Heterosexual AIDS, and he became a pariah as a result, even as the book became a bestseller. Keep this in mind. The experts are always looking for the next panic, be it AIDS or climate extinction, what have you. But people were so frightened of AIDS, people who had no reason to be frightened of AIDS in the 1980s, that they'd get some sort of rash on their chest or perhaps a bruise or something, and oh my God, I've got it, I'm going to die, we're all going to die. And nothing like that happened. The World Health Organization was pushing the AIDS panic as hard as it could. Now, I don't recall that the World Health Organization suffered a catastrophic loss in confidence. It should have, but it didn't. We live in a world where people, especially experts, especially those acolytes of the religion of science, never pay a price for being wrong. They never pay a price for being wrong. Let's take a look at the financial news. Coronavirus job losses could total 47 million. Unemployment rate may hit 32%, the Federal Reserve estimates. It's my understanding that the unemployment rate reached a high of around 25% during the so-called Great Depression. So this would be significantly worse. Keep in mind also that this was planned. This was a planned wrecking of the world economy by our world leaders, and they did so after being advised by experts. Oil drops more than 6% to 18-year low as global demand evaporates. I'll have more to say about oil a little later in the show. But things look better on Wall Street. The Dow was up 691 points today, or 3.2%. The S&P 500 was up 3.4%, while the NASDAQ was up 3.6%. Tech stocks such as Microsoft, Alphabet, and Amazon led the way higher for Wall Street. Microsoft jumped 7%, while Alphabet and Amazon climbed 3.3 and 3.4% respectively. Well, apparently Microsoft is up as much as it is because demand for its cloud services. Alphabet, well, they own Google and YouTube, and that's what everyone's doing now. They're spending even more of their time staring at screens. And Amazon, well, I guess Amazon is going to be the only vendor. Maybe they and Walmart will be the only vendors left after this is all over. So I was really hoping that Trump was going to stick to his resolution to restart the United States by Easter Sunday. He said that he wanted the churches to be full, but instead he chickened out. That he has canceled Easter. Well, actually, the church has canceled Easter. Maybe Trump could have bullied them into reopening. And I'll have more to say about some resistors to that a little later. But no, April has been canceled by Trump. According to the CBC, many, I wonder who these many are, had worried U.S. president would lift restrictions too soon. And what counts as too soon? Well, I suppose we will have to let the experts tell us. As Americans hunker down for another weekend, President Donald Trump faces a critical choice. The U.S. has topped 120,000 coronavirus cases, the most in the world, and by late Monday, the White House campaign of 15 days to stop the spread will end, leaving an unpredictable president with a critical decision to extend. Yes, let's see. What does Axios have to say? America's Grimmest Month. This was an opportunity for journalists to roll out, to retread some of their favorite cliches. T.S. Eliot, April is the cruelest month, but Caitlin Owens, perhaps Eliot wasn't on her English 100 survey course. President Trump asked Americans to continue social distancing until April 30th. Officials warned that tens or even hundreds of thousands of Americans could die, and that's the least depressing scenario. I suspect that this is going to be the last hurrah for the media, because they are cheering. There's no question about it. They are cheering the possible death of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in order to own Donald Trump. The big picture, because of early missteps by the Trump administration, the virus has already spread widely throughout the United States undetected, and the number of cases in most major U.S. cities has skyrocketed. We must now wait for the virus to run its course among those who are already sick or have recently been exposed and fall ill in the next few days. Even though the administration is urging adherence to its social distancing guidelines, many states still haven't shut down non-essential businesses or issued shelter-in-place orders, meaning the virus is still likely spreading in those areas. Well, yes. We're hearing a lot of talk about the spirit of World War II, the spirit of the Blitz. We're all in it together. This is absolute tosh. We live in a situation now, we're contending with a situation where we're scared to death of each other. I spoke last week about Dame Myra Hess, the famed pianist who raised spirits in London during World War II with recitals. Well, those recitals wouldn't be allowed anymore because you can't have people getting together because people are the devil. Other people will kill you. Every single other person on earth is a direct, possibly fatal threat to you. So what of Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau? This is a very strange story. Very strange indeed. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on Sunday he will continue to self-isolate at home, even though his wife has recovered from the COVID-19 disease caused by the new coronavirus. Trudeau said he was acting out of caution. Quote, "But the fact is, I was in the same house with someone who, until a few days ago, had COVID-19, and therefore the countdown will continue because I could have theoretically caught the virus even just a few days ago, so I will remain in isolation." It's now day 18 of his isolation, and we were told that 14 days was all that was needed. He suggested he could extend for a little less than an additional 14 days as she stopped showing symptoms, presumably that means his wife, a few days ago. And of course, this is something we're asking everyone else to do. Well, he is more than asking, he is demanding. Stay home, stay home, stay home. If you don't stay home, you are wicked. You are a public enemy. Trudeau said his wife has taken their 3 children to the Prime Minister's summer residence in Harrington Lake in Quebec. Sophie Gregoire Trudeau received the clearance from her doctor and Ottawa Public Health on Saturday. Trudeau's office announced March 12th that she had tested positive for the coronavirus after she fell ill upon returning from a trip to London. Yes, apparently she is the patient zero of the celebrities, having infected the actor Idris Elba through hugging. That's the word they're using. And the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, was also infected, and doubtless many others. There is a rumor going around that Justin and Sophie split about 4 or 5 months ago, and this strange decision by Justin Trudeau certainly tends to confirm that. One would think that he would be eager to rejoin his wife and 3 young children, but he is definitely in no hurry. No hurry at all. So let's see what's happening in the chat. Oh, a comment about Oprah, which I'm not going to repeat. Jonathan Paul says most oil potentates deserve poverty. Yeah, perhaps, except that I don't know how much of Alberta is going to be left after this, and this is going to happen very quickly. Rustin Shackelford says my church will be open and distributing the sacrament for Easter. Well, I'm very glad to hear it. Lecomte de Boreas says media needs some babysitting themselves. Well, I think they're going to get more than that. He follows up, people will meet for Easter and media will blame all deaths on the U.S. on Trump, including the car accidents. Well, that's not really that much of an exaggeration, because already we see that heart attacks are now being ascribed to the coronavirus. Okay. In Britain, they have gone, well, completely insane. Completely insane. It is anarcho-tyranny in action. Brendan O'Neill of Spiked Magazine said on talk radio today, for years the police said they didn't have enough resources to tackle knife crime or investigate burglaries. Yet now they seem to have plenty of time to spy on people walking in the Peak District or going for 2 jogs a day. It's disgraceful. Once again, I would like to repeat that I never, ever, ever want to hear from anyone again about the cowardice of people living in Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Russia. People who, dissidents, as we call them, they were faced with, I don't know, at best the gulag, at worst torture and execution. No one's being threatened with the gulag here. No one's being threatened with torture or execution. And we must all stay inside. We must all isolate forever, perhaps. Why? Because the experts say so. Yes, let's see. Someone responded to Brendan O'Neill. The UK is busy bankrupting itself and has conveniently forgotten that in 2014-15, 28,330 people died from regular flu, and we didn't have a lockdown that year. About 560,000 people die in the UK every year. Coronavirus deaths are going to be a tiny fraction. History will not be kind to Boris. Yes, there is a health expert in Britain. She is called Dr. Jenny Harries. You notice how many of these public health officials are female? She is the deputy chief medic of Britain. And she says that Britons will not get back to normal life for 6 months or more. Oh, well, who died and made her queen? Look, if this lasts for 6 months more in Britain, there isn't going to be a Britain. It's that simple. Professor Neil Ferguson, he of the thousands of lines of undocumented C code, who advises the government, said the total lockdown is likely to last until June. See, this is what happens when you make a fetish of a particular class of people, and we have made a fetish of scientists, of experts. Peter Hitchens is continuing his brave and rather lonely fight for sanity. He wrote on Sunday As I watched the Prime Minister order mass house arrest on Monday night, I felt revulsion, anger, and grief as anyone brought up when this was a free and well-governed country would. I also felt terribly alone. You could not have known from anything broadcast that night or printed the following day that anyone was unhappy with these events, but they were. So above all things this week, I would like to thank all the kind, perplexed people who have got in touch with me by so many means to say they share my doubts about the government's handling of COVID-19. There are many, in fact, of us. If you feel this way, you are nothing like as solitary as you think. Next, I would like to thank all those who disagree with me, who choose to abuse me, often with lies, personal smears, and swear words. Your childish, intolerant reaction has strengthened me in my conviction that mine is the better case. If your policy is so good, why can you not defend it like civilized adults? Do you really think that I regret needless deaths any less than you? Can you not accept that I also have good motives? Well, we've seen exactly the same thing with the abuse directed at the so-called climate change deniers. Oh, they're just like Holocaust deniers, and we moved this on to what coronavirus deniers. Again, in Britain, America, Canada, when are the bodies going to start stacking up like cordwood? But the claim is that they already are. Hitchens continues, when I predicted roadblocks in my column 2 weeks ago, I did so out of an instinct that we were entering on the craziest period of our lives since the death of Princess Diana. And now there are such roadblocks, officious, embarrassing blots on our national reputation. But even I would not have dared to predict the mass house arrest under which we are now confined. I have found the origin of this bizarre Napoleonic decree a few clauses in the Public Health Control of Disease Act, 1984, which I confess I had not even heard of. It just goes to show how careful you have to be with the wording of the laws you pass. If the TV this weekend is full of pictures of people sunning themselves in city parks or escaping to the high hills, there will be plenty of zealots and politicians ready to call for yet more restrictions, subjecting all of us to collective punishment. Perhaps we will emulate the French or Italian states which have returned to their despotic origins and reduced their populations to a sort of cowering serfdom, barely able to step in the street. According to Section 45C3C of this Act, once the Health Secretary believes there is a threat to public health, he has, or claims to have, limitless powers to do what he likes, quote, imposing or enabling the imposition of restrictions or requirements or in relation to persons, things, or premises in the event of or in response to a threat to public health. Well, that's pretty wide, isn't it? The former Supreme Court Judge Lord Sumption doubts that the Act can be used in this way and warns there is a difference between law and official instructions. It is the difference between a democracy and a police state. Liberty and the rule of law are surely worth something, even in the face of a pandemic. Lord Sumption is generally a liberal hero, and he was invited to deliver last year's BBC Right lectures. But the human rights crowd have all melted away in the face of this outrage. So his warning was buried on page 54 of the Times on Thursday, and Parliament, already supine, has slunk away after its craven acceptance of new attacks on liberty on Monday. If it ever meets again, it will be as a poor, neutralized thing. One day it may come to be called the dummy Parliament, whereas the Supreme Court when you really need it. So do not be surprised by anything. After last week, can we rule anything out? This new Stasi society has a horrifying level of support. Humberside police are advertising a portal for citizens to inform on their neighbors for breaking these social distancing rules. Yes, it's what we're seeing in Britain now is like an in real life remake of Dad's Army, only much nastier. Most of people will by now have viewed the online film of Metropolitan Police officers bellowing officiously at sunbathers on Shepherd's Bush Green in London, energetically stamping out the foul crime of lying on the grass. Others will have seen the films taken by Derbyshire police drones of lonely walkers on the remote, empty hills, publicly pillaring them for not obeying the regulation. It is genuinely hard to see what damage these walkers have done. But as a former resident of the USSR, I can tell you that this sort of endless meddling by petty authority in the details of life, reinforced by narcs, is normal in unfree societies such as we have now become for an indefinite period. It is, by the way, also a seedbed for corruption. Meanwhile, our economy is still crippled, and the overpraised Chancellor Rishi Sunak, like some beaming Dr. Feelgood with a case full of dodgy stimulants, seeks to soothe the pain by injections of funny money. It is sad that far too little of this is being reported as prominently as it should be by our supposedly diverse and free media, especially the BBC, which has largely closed its mind and its airwaves to dissent. It is quite funny that a statue of George Orwell stands by the entrance to the BBC, bearing the inscription, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." Well, of course, George Orwell had a very difficult time getting his book on his satire on Animal Farm, published in, I believe, 1949, because he's making fun of the Soviet Union, and we can't have that. The Soviet Union is our friend. It reminds me of Harry and Paul's story of the BBC Two, when the boffins, the top boffins of the BBC, are discussing what they should call this, and one young fellow says, "Shouldn't we call it BBC Stalin?" And one of the others says, "Shh, you horrid little homosexual." But this is the BBC. Aren't we all communists? Shh. Yes, that was then, and this is now. Hitchens continues. He refers to Neil Ferguson, of course. He has twice revised his terrifying prophecy, first to fewer than 20,000 deaths, and then on Friday to 5,700. Could he have softened his stance because of the publication early last week of a rival view from distinguished scientists at Oxford University, led by Sunitra Gupta, professor of theoretical epidemiology? It suggests that fewer than 1 in 1,000 of those infected with COVID-19 may become ill enough to need hospital treatment. The vast majority develop very mild symptoms or none at all. Millions may already have had it. As I said earlier on this show, it seems probable to me that I've had it myself, likely in, late December, early January, at a time when a great many people were getting sick, quite sick. I was under the weather, severely under the weather, for the better part of a week, and I had all of the symptoms associated with coronavirus, and it seems pretty obvious to me that coronavirus was in this country by that time. Okay, so we talked about Jenny Harries. Oh, yes, so what are we doing here? Okay, everybody stay home. Nobody go out. Going out is wicked, and people will squeal on you if you do. Oh, and by the way, all the businesses are shut, or most of them are shut. So you are unemployed, panic-stricken, and you are forced to remain home. What could the possible result, one possible result of that be? Well, suicide is one. But here's another from the Daily Mail. 9 die in string of killings as UK enters second week of quarantine. Family of 4 are found dead at home. A husband is charged with killing wife. Nurses stabbed to death. And father, mother, and daughter die in murder-suicide. Well, it's hardly a surprise, is it? Candice Malcolm, who's an immigration reformer, has a piece on True North. Are we massively overreacting to the threat of the coronavirus? New evidence suggests we very well could be. She talks about Neil Ferguson again. She responds, a team of epidemiologists at Oxford University who are critical of Ferguson's model released their own study, which suggests that half of the population of the UK may have already been infected by the coronavirus. This view was echoed by Stanford University professors of medicine, Dr. Ben David and Dr. Bhattacharya, who suggested in the Wall Street Journal that the true fatality rate is much lower than assumed because of a lack of testing. What if the overwhelming majority of those who contract coronavirus never even get tested because their symptoms are mild or non-existent? The Stanford professors urge governments to focus efforts on protecting older and more vulnerable population groups and boosting resources like ICU beds and ventilators at hospital. But they question the wisdom of universal lockdowns and conclude it may not be worth the cost it imposes on the economy, community, and individual mental and physical health. Another Stanford professor, Nobel Prize winner Michael Levitt, created a model that accurately predicted the number of cases and deaths in China. Well, I'll just say I don't trust any numbers from China about anything. Malcolm writes, in other words, the science is not yet settled on coronavirus. That is why the Trudeau government's daily assurance is that their policy is based on science and evidence do not act up. Which science and whose evidence? For 6 weeks, politicians across Canada downplayed the risk of coronavirus and assured Canadians there was nothing to worry about apart from unsubstantiated claims of a rise of racism and xenophobia against Chinese people. The Trudeau government defended open borders, allowed unchecked travel from China, and even praised the Chinese Communist dictatorship for its, quote, outstanding leadership in the fight against the epidemic, unquote. As a result, more than 1 million Canadians applied for EI last week. 45% of young Canadians aged 18 to 24 have been laid off, and half of all Albertan households have experienced work loss. Now, Donald Trump was ridiculed for talking about suicide. I can't imagine why, but here's some data you might find interesting. Public health is incredibly important, but it isn't the only thing to consider. A University of Calgary study found that for every % increase in the unemployment rate, the suicide rate increased by 2.8%. And Canada's unemployment rate just jumped from 5.8% to 13.9% in 1 week. It's really hard to know what to make of all this, because the leaders of the world, as advised by experts, have all decided to deliberately crash their economies. Now, Donald Trump resisted this at first, but then it seems that he was bullied into being as panic-stricken as everyone else, even as he is assailed for apparently not being panic-stricken enough, even as he is assailed for not being a fascist dictator. Earlier I mentioned Michael Fumento, who I've interviewed many times, a brave man. He had a piece in the New Criterion on March the 26th called Sweet Hysteria. He begins, the United States is staring at a cinema-worthy apocalypse, with feral animals eating human corpses, mutant plants reoccupying streets and buildings, empty restaurants and malls across the landscape. Well, the last part is true anyway, not because of the disease, but rather the hysteria. He asks, do we really need to destroy the country to save it? Now, the pandemic is showing signs of slowing worldwide, and that was to be expected per what's called Farr's law, which dictates that all epidemics tend to rise and fall in a roughly symmetrical pattern or bell-shaped curve. Ebola, Zika, SARS, and AIDS all followed that pattern. So does the seasonal flu each year. Peaks for COVID-19 have already been reported in China, South Korea, and Singapore. Importantly, Farr's law has precious little to do with human interventions, such as social distancing, to flatten the curve. It occurs because communicable diseases nab the low-hanging fruit first, in this case the elderly with comorbid conditions, but then find subsequent victims harder and harder to reach. Until now, more or less, COVID-19 has been finding that low-hanging fruit in new countries, but the supply is close to running out. While many people assume that the draconian regulations implemented in China are what brought the virus under control, Farr's law offers a different explanation. Even the New York Times admitted that South Korea recovered far more quickly with regulatory measures nowhere near the scale of China's, although the Times still attributes that entirely to human intervention, of course, assuming no role to Mother Nature. When the coronavirus epidemic ends and the public health zealots inevitably slap themselves on the back for having prevented the nightmare scenarios they themselves cooked up, don't buy it. So I see that Fumento has made the same prediction as I have, and has Peter Hitchens has. He says, this isn't to say that thorough hand washing several times a day and not sneezing and coughing in other spaces won't help. It will. But the authoritarian and economically devastating measures taken by the United States and other countries are wrecking the world economy. Any feared apocalypse would happen on their account, not the diseases. Coronavirus has not emptied our streets. Government dictates have. I'll just break in to say that I saw a story, I think in the Daily Mail, which has gone absolutely nuts, stating or suggesting very strongly that the 6 foot or 2 meter distance that people are now required to keep from each other is not sufficient. The 25 feet is necessary. And yes, suicide is going to be a very serious problem. Oh, also, the virus can stay alive on metal surfaces for up to 9 days. Everyone is in contact with metal surfaces every single day. Doorknobs, door handles, faucets, every single way. There's no getting away from metal surfaces. Again, I get the impression that the media is trying to literally scaring us to death. Fumento continues, we're seeing such a dramatic spike in cases because testing has only recently become readily available in the United States due to a delay in the CDC developing its own assay. This availability has been almost universally hailed as a good thing, but it has at least 2 bad aspects. First, tests will pick up many asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic people who will be counted as cases just as much as those on death's door. This will further contribute to hysteria. Second, many of those highly mild cases will suddenly develop nocebo symptoms, the opposite of placebo, in which negative expectations seem to cause real symptoms. This will only add to the confusion. Nocebo symptoms are psychosomatic but can feel very real. They can definitely mimic COVID-19 symptoms like fatigue and shortness of breath. It's a good guess that hospitals are already seeing their share of the worried well, people who were feeling more or less okay before they tested positive and suddenly feel deathly ill. On the positive side, the more you test, the lower the death rate becomes because the denominator grows faster than the numerator. Rather than the 3.4% rate the WHO touted in early March, the crude U.S. death rate is about 1.35%. As testing continues, the rate will drop even further. Now, how many deaths can the U.S. reasonably expect? From what the media tells us, Italy's coronavirus crisis could be America's. Really? That country so far has had just over 7,500 deaths out of a population of 50 million, but the number of new cases and the number of deaths per day have peaked, with the highest number coming on March the 21st. Still, at this point, that's a stunning 10% crude death rate, by far the highest death percentage in the world, which of course is why the media choose to focus on it almost exclusively. Germany, by contrast, has only 240 deaths out of a much larger population. But yes, the media is telling us, oh, they're undercounting. They're undercounting in Germany. Are you scared to death yet? Why aren't you scared to death? But it is your patriotic duty to be scared to death. Why is this happening in Italy? Partly because Italy simply doesn't have a great healthcare system. Last year, the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security ranked the United States the best prepared country in the world to handle a pandemic in late 2019. Italy came in 31st place. They don't have very many hospital beds in Italy. Beyond that, Italy has also the 5th oldest population in the world. The United States ranks 61st. We already knew from data released by the Chinese Center for Disease Control that COVID-19 preys overwhelmingly upon the old and infirm, with death rates dramatically higher for those aged 70 and older. Further, almost all the elderly dead in that study had comorbid conditions of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or hypertension. I'll just point out that we are seeing stories about individual deaths. Police officers in the United States And I noticed in the three cases which have been touted by the media in the last day, all three of these people were clearly morbidly obese. Yes. Is there any ray of sunshine? Any rays of sunshine? Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz have abandoned my country, and particularly the island on which I live, Vancouver Island, with not a word of thanks to us. They have headed to LA, where apparently, well, I guess this wasn't done in LA. Well, we don't really know where Meghan Mertz has been for the last few weeks, but she is going to make a movie appearance, narrating something for Disney called Elephants. Now, the rumor is that a well-known actor had already done the narration, and then it was decided, no, Meghan Mertz is hotter than you. So here's a whole bunch of money to donate to your favorite charity for shutting up about this. That's certainly a way to make friends. According to the Mail, Meghan Mertz and Prince Harry have insisted they never intended to ask Donald Trump for help with security costs after the president tweeted to say U.S. taxpayers would not contribute towards protecting them. Well, bravo, Mr. Trump. Today, Buckingham Palace refused to comment about whether this meant UK taxpayers would no longer have to contribute towards any future bill. This is after the Sussexes had said that private funded security arrangements have been made. This just sounds like it's a completely planted story, in the sense that if you need to spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars for personal security, then obviously you must be the most popular people in the whole world. Are they really that popular? They are no longer popular in Britain, that's for sure. The bill for their security, which includes a roster of 9 highly skilled British officers shuttling between the UK and US, is estimated to be as much as £8 million a year and is covered by British taxpayers through the Metropolitan Police budget. They also received support from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that will end at the end of this month. We're talking about World War II a lot these days. There were certain people like W.H. Auden, Stephen Spender, who fled. Christopher Isherwood, they fled to the United States during World War II, and this was held against them for the rest of their lives. They seem to having abandoned their country at a moment of great peril, and I can't help but think that the same stigma will be attached to Harry and Meghan for the rest of their lives. Well, good riddance to bad rubbish. Now, back to the coronavirus. A piece by Dr. John Lee in The Spectator a couple of days ago. He is described as a recently retired professor of pathology and a former NHS consultant pathologist. Now, what he has to say is particularly important in terms of how virulent COVID-19 or coronavirus is. He begins, in announcing the most far-reaching restrictions on personal freedom in the history of our nation, Boris Johnson resolutely followed the scientific advice that he had been given. The advisors to the government seemed calm and collected, with a solid consensus among them. In the face of a new viral threat with numbers of cases surging daily, I'm not sure that any prime minister would have acted very differently. But I'd like to raise some perspectives that have hardly been aired in the past weeks and which point to an interpretation of the figures rather different from that which the government is acting on. I'm a recently retired professor of pathology and NHS consultant pathologist, and have spent most of my adult life in healthcare and science, fields which all too often are characterized by doubt rather than certainty. There is room for different interpretations of the current data. The simplest way to judge whether we have an exceptionally lethal disease is to look at the death rates. Are more people dying than we would expect to die anyway in a given week or month? And Yes, this is the question that I have been asking from the very beginning. Yes, people are dying from COVID-19, but is it more than one would have expected to die of respiratory illnesses during this time? And we don't really have a solid answer to that. Dr. Lee continues, statistically, we would expect about 51,000 to die in Britain this month. Yes, keep that in mind. When people talk about the death toll, the horrific death toll from COVID-19, well, how many people typically die in a month in your country or in your state or in your province? At the time of writing, 422 deaths are linked to COVID-19, so 0.8% of that expected total. On a global basis, we'd expect 14 million to die over the first 3 months of the year. The world's 18,944 coronavirus deaths represent 0.14% of that total. These figures might shoot up, but they are right now lower than other infectious diseases that we live with, such as flu. Not figures that would, in and of themselves, cause drastic global reactions. Initial reported figures from China and Italy suggested a death rate of 5% to 15%, similar to Spanish flu. Given that cases were increasing exponentially, this raised the prospect of death rates that no healthcare system in the world would be able to cope with. At the time of writing, the UK's 422 deaths and 8,077 known cases give an apparent death rate of 5%. This is often cited as a cause for concern, contrasted with the mortality rate of seasonal flu, which is estimated at about 0.1%. But we ought to look very carefully at the data. Are these figures really comparable? Most of the UK testing has been in hospitals where there is a high concentration of patients susceptible to the effects of any infection. As anyone who has worked with sick people will know, any testing regime that is based only in hospitals will overestimate the virulence of an infection. Also, we're only dealing with those COVID-19 cases that have made people sick enough or worried enough to get tested. There will be many more unaware that they have the virus with either no symptoms or mild ones. That's why when Britain had 590 diagnosed cases, Sir Patrick Vallance, the government's chief scientific advisor, suggested that the real figure was probably between 5 and 10,000 cases, 10 to 20 times higher. If he's right, the headline death rate due to this virus is likely to be 10 to 20 times lower, say 0.25% to 0.5%. That puts the COVID-19 mortality rate in the range associated with infections like flu. Now, here's the money graph. But there's another, potentially even more serious problem, the way that deaths are recorded. If someone dies of a respiratory infection in the UK, the specific cause of the infection is not usually recorded, unless the illness is a rare, quote, notifiable disease, unquote. So the vast majority of respiratory deaths in the UK are recorded as bronchopneumonia, pneumonia, old age, or a similar designation. We don't really test for flu or other seasonal infections. If the patient has, say, cancer, motor neuron disease, or another serious disease, this will be recorded as the cause of death, even if the final illness was a respiratory infection. This means UK certifications normally under-record deaths due to respiratory infections. Now look at what has happened since the emergence of COVID-19. The list of notifiable diseases has been updated. This list, as well as containing smallpox, which has been extinct for many years, and conditions such as anthrax, brucellosis, plague, and rabies, which most doctors will never see in their entire careers, has now been amended to include COVID-19, but not flu. That means every positive test for COVID-19 must be notified in a way that it just would not be for flu or most other infections. In the current climate, anyone with a positive test for COVID-19 will certainly be known to clinical staff looking after them. If any of these patients dies, staff will have to record the COVID-19 designation on the death certificate, contrary to usual practice for most infections of this kind. There's a big difference between COVID-19 causing death and COVID-19 being found in someone who died of other causes. Making COVID-19 notifiable might give the appearance of it causing increasing numbers of deaths. Whether this is true or not, it might appear far more of a killer than flu simply because of the way deaths are recorded. As I pointed out last week, 90% of American adults have Epstein-Barr virus in their body. Now, if we were to make a panic about Epstein-Barr, then we could come to the conclusion that hundreds of thousands of people are dying each year of Epstein-Barr, because if 9 out of 10 deaths were ascribed to Epstein-Barr, well, then I guess Epstein-Barr would be the greatest killer in the world, but that's not how we do it. Dr. Lee continues, let us also consider the COVID-19 graphs showing exponential rise in cases and deaths. They can look alarming. But if we tracked flu or other seasonal viruses in the same way, we would also experience an exponential increase. We would also see some countries behind others and striking fatality rates. The United States Centers for Disease Control, for example, publishes weekly estimates of flu cases. The latest figures show that since September, flu has infected 38 million Americans, hospitalized 390,000, and killed 23,000. This does not cause public alarm because flu is similar. I suppose what this comes down to in terms of the public is that it seems to be very difficult for the public to understand, well, first of all, that everybody dies, and that people are dying continually. Thousands of people die, tens of thousands of people die every day in the world. Now, again, most of these people are old. As I've pointed out several times, at least 11 of the deaths in Canada, and I believe there's still under 40, are attributed to one old age home in North Vancouver, British Columbia, and now we have another cluster at an old age home in Ontario. This is the kind of thing that one expects, that old age homes are very dangerous places to live in, because you're surrounded by, other old people, the very old people. The average age in this old age home in North Vancouver is 87. People who are 87 are highly susceptible to respiratory illness and to all manner of other deadly conditions. Not deadly for the rest of us, but deadly for them. In the same way that people who are morbidly obese are highly susceptible to respiratory illness and all manner of other conditions which are not all of that threatening to the rest of us. To give you an example of the lockstep of the British media, the Daily Express has a piece on Lord Sumption, who I mentioned earlier. Mass hysteria. Ex-Supreme Court judge brands UK police state in astounding BBC rant. I've seen this word rant used again and again in the last couple of weeks. Anyone who dares to speak out against the police state is accused of having indulged in a rant. Lord Sumption, a former UK Supreme Court judge, has criticized the emergency measures taken in response to the coronavirus pandemic as proof of hysteria-driven government policy. He called the current government measures symptoms of collective hysteria and warned that the cure was becoming worse than the disease in a shock outburst. The former senior judge branded the widespread confinement to houses as imprisonment and called the Derbyshire police force disgraceful and shameful for their overreach. He told the BBC's World at 1, when human societies lose their freedom, it is not usually because tyrants have taken it away. It is usually because people have willingly surrendered their freedom for protection against some external threat. The threat is usually a real threat but exaggerated, and that is what I fear is happening now. The pressure on the politicians has come from the public. They want action. They don't want to pause to ask whether the action will work. Anyone who has studied history will recognize the symptoms of classic collective hysteria. Hysteria is infectious. We are working ourselves up as we exaggerate the threat and stop asking ourselves whether the cure is worse than the disease. We have to recognize that this is how societies become despotisms. The symptoms of coronavirus are clearly significant for those with other underlying health conditions, especially if they are old. There are exceptional cases when young people are struck down. But in Italy, only 12% of deaths can be clearly tied to coronavirus being the main cause of death. Yes, this is serious, but is it serious enough to warrant placing the entire population under house imprisonment, wrecking our economy for an indefinite period, destroying businesses that honest and hardworking people have taken years to build up, saddling future generations with debt, inflicting depression, stress, suicide, and unbelievable distress on millions of people who are not especially vulnerable? He criticized the press for amplifying and echoing the public sense of panic before ripping into the conduct of the police, singling out the Derbyshire police for criticism. He said the behavior of the Derbyshire police in shaming people for taking walks or wrecking natural beauty spots is frankly disgraceful. This is what a police state is like. Derbyshire has shamed our policing traditions. They have lost sight of the real functions. They have tried to stop people from taking exercise in the open country, which is not contrary to regulations. They have turned themselves from citizens in uniform into school prefects. Well, it all seems very sensible to me. I just don't. Again, there's a huge mystery, tremendous mystery, at the heart of this. Is it simply the universal mental retardation that Shiva Naipaul noted in Northern California in 1980? Has it become truly universal? Are we stupid people led by stupid men and women? Or is there something more sinister afoot? Let's talk about, let's talk about restrictions on freedom in the United States. It's from ABC News. Despite repeated warnings from health experts about the risk of social interaction amid the novel coronavirus outbreak, governors in at least 4 states have exempted houses of worship from statewide bans on mass gatherings, and this weekend will offer a first test to see if any congregations forge ahead, despite the warnings. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is a woman who I'd never heard of until a couple of weeks ago, and now bids fair to be the most obnoxious woman in America. She has banned gatherings of 50 people or more and signed a statewide stay-at-home order on Monday. Both mandates explicitly exempt houses of worship from the misdemeanor penalty for violators. That's an area we don't have the ability to directly enforce or control, Whitmer said on Fox News Sunday. She said she felt pressure from Republicans in the state legislature to include the exemption and said her hands were tied by the separation of church and state. I'm looking at a picture of Governor Whitmer here, and she has the same curiously frozen face as Joe Biden, suggesting a lot of work done on it. Yes, well, the price of matriarchy is eternal panic. If this had happened, well, come on, similar things have happened. Swine flu and all these other flus, which were as bad or worse than COVID-19, did not lead to panic, did not lead to deliberate cratering of the economy. And one of the reasons why is that was still a patriarchal society, and now we live in a matriarchal society where no level of risk is acceptable. Democratic Kansas Governor Laura Kelly tightened restrictions on mass gatherings in her state to more than 10 people. But much like Michigan, she exempted houses of worship as long as congregants engage in appropriate social distancing. This week, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, are you noticing a pattern here? Imposed a ban on gatherings of 5 or more that excludes those that congregated in a church, synagogue, mosque, or other place of worship. Not everyone believes that imposing constraints on religious gatherings would run afoul of constitutional protections. Yes, I can hardly wait for what's coming next. Rachel Laser, the president and CEO of the nonprofit advocacy group Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, said the governors are misinterpreting restrictions on impeding religious expression. She says the Constitution actually requires religious and secular institutions be treated the same. Yes, I guess that's why they have tax exemption for religious institutions in the United States. Does Rachel Laser, she knows this, right? I suspect that she's against it, very strongly against it, but she actually comes out in public and says that, secular and religious institutions must be treated exactly the same. Now, if we go to New York, tough guy, Bill de Blasio. According to the Jerusalem Post, New York City mayor to synagogues, close for coronavirus or be shut down permanently. Whoa, wow. Are we going to start seeing some plagues? Egyptian-style plagues in New York City? While the majority of synagogues have closed in accordance with city orders aimed at slowing the spread of coronavirus, others have stayed open. We've had extraordinary, across-the-board rabbinical support from all the different elements of the Jewish community, and the same is true of other faiths as well, de Blasio said in his Friday news briefing. Some synagogues, however, are still holding minyanin, gatherings of 10 worshipers or more to hold prayer services. A small number of religious communities, specific churches, and specific synagogues are unfortunately not paying attention to this guidance, even though it is so widespread. I want to say to all those who are preparing for the potential religious services this weekend, if you go to your synagogue, if you go to your church and attempt to hold services after being told so often not to, our enforcement agents will have no choice but to shut down those services. He warned, however, admitting he does not say this with joy. Oh, really? Oh, really? Isn't that what they did in the Soviet Union? And now they're doing it in the United States. But of course, as I pointed out, the Catholic Church, among other faiths, has decided, nah, people don't need the sacraments. And in some places, Catholic priests are being laid off and encouraged to apply for employment insurance. Yeah, maybe there won't be any priests after this, because we've been hearing about a shortage of priests, and that's why we had to have female priests. But maybe the new line is that priests are simply surplus to requirements. You can do all this stuff over the internet. And as far as the sacraments go, that's just formalism, isn't it? And haven't we moved beyond formalism? Okay, so let's go back to the chat. Okay. We've got a lot of comments here. It's good to see. Good to see. Buffering. Oh, are people complaining about that again? I haven't seen an in real life sick person. I'm looking at, people can make masks out of anything, and apparently people can construct their own masks. The percentage of people that I'm seeing on the street, and I've made a point of being on the street in the past few days, I would say about 5%. About 1 in 20. Oh, no buffering for the first time this week, says Jonathan Paul. Yeah. I gather the services, YouTube and other services, are rather, they're struggling to meet the demand. Okay. Let's see. Lecomte de Barres says hygiene is a standard to be respected regardless of if there is a new virus or not. Social paralysis is not acceptable, not only because it is abusive, which it is, but because it is inefficient. Well, yes, fear is known to be immunosuppressive, that there is a phenomenon called scared to death. I mean, that actually exists. And the nocebo effect, of which Michael Fiumento spoke, is absolutely real. If you tell people they're going to die, or there's a high likelihood there's going to die, well, then it turns out that a great many of these people actually do die, even though there's not all that much wrong with them. The only thing social distancing does is slowing the process of natural immunity, and I fully agree. Chogokin666 says it gives busybody types and germophobes a license to be the assholes they long to be. Yeah, that's the downside of the so-called spirit of the Blitz. Prison channels, hip-hop nonsense. Okay, I don't know what that's a reference to. Soon I will be too close to KMG, says Jonathan Paul. I don't know what that means. You're planning to move to Seattle? Seattle's about, Seattle's about 65 miles from here. Um, like the 5'1", 394 pounds guy who died of coronavirus. Well, yeah. When you are that overweight, you are risking your life when you get up off your couch and walk to the bathroom. Seriously. Walrus Libertarian says women are expert at placebo diseases. Well, it's a curious thing about women that they like to talk about disease. I remember when I was a boy, I would come home from school and in elementary school, and my mother would be on the phone, and she'd be talking to one of her friends about her pregnancies and complications and various other medical things leading to hospital stays. And then I'd come home for dinner, 2 hours later, and she'd still be on the phone talking to the same woman about all that. Sunshine prohibited. Well, I'm told that vitamin D3, apparently vitamin D3 is good for this. Now, for the past couple of weeks, I simply haven't worried about it, but there is this nocebo effect, which has definitely affected me. That if I feel the need to cough, which I probably do on average about 10 times a day, I think, no, I can't cough. What if other people hear me coughing? What if other people see me coughing? Are the people going to take me away? Am I going to be forcibly confined? Hypertensive, obese, non-compliant, diabetic, alcoholic. Is that an acronym? HONDA. Honda. Oh, okay. I see. Okay. YT. Hello, friends. Another month of this shit. Watch the deranged left scream in horror as Trump signals around April 30th things ought to be returning to normal. Yes. I think that Trump has boxed himself in here, and I think he's willingly boxed himself in here. That he has to say, we're going to try to get back to normal on April the 30th. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing. It would simply look too weak. I wish he had kept to his goal of Easter, which would be a very appropriate goal, seeing as that Easter is the great holiday of rebirth, But you see how powerful the elite is, how powerful the media is. Not for much longer, though. I've seen people are talking about the chaos in New York Hospital, and I've seen people respond. People who've worked in New York hospitals saying 20 years ago it was exactly the same. Let's see. Okay. Conspiracy. I don't know. I'm going to talk about that a little later. Oh, we're talking about favorite metal bands. Best metal band is still Early Sabbath. Their first 4 records are their best records, are they not? That was always my opinion. The smell of a baking cake will disinfect your domicile and spirit. Actually, Marshall McLuhan came up with this idea. He had a friend who was a real estate agent, and she asked him, how could she sell more houses? And he told her to have something baking in the oven, cookies or a cake. And this plays a little mental trick on people, that they would go into this house that was for sale, and they would smell this, and that they would imagine it to be their own home already, so they'd want to buy it. Now I'm told that real estate agents, that they smear something on a pan or a piece of aluminum foil and put it in the oven to get the same effect with less effort. YT says our society is literally and metaphorically a bunch of pussies. It's a curious thing about globalism, because COVID-19 coronavirus is globalist disease. That globalism was supposed to unite us and make us stronger, but it has done exactly the opposite. Now we are at each other's throats. Uh, what was that from Alex DeLarge? I lost that there. We got a whole bunch of comments at once. Ricky Bullock says one of our directors at the hospital died today, being attributed to COVID-19. She was elderly and her husband died at the beginning of the year. Well, yes, this is a well-known phenomenon. Particularly when the wife dies, the husband doesn't survive much longer. I mean, we're talking about, when they're old, that they don't feel that they have anything to live for. In particular, that stress does raise cortisol, though, says Alex DeLarge. Claire Koss says women overreact to show they care. Well, yeah, I suppose, but there's the consensus involved there. Everyone else is panicked. Why aren't you panicked? Everyone else is saying, we can't do this anymore, so why aren't you saying it? And Run, how many will die from a global depression? Well, frankly, if we're talking about, 30% employment, and this is not taking into account the secondary effects, because a lot of businesses are just holding on now. And now that April's been canceled, and I suppose everyone's being encouraged to apply for these government benefits, I would not be surprised to see unemployment go up to 40 or 50%, which raises the question, is there a way back? This is a serious question. That's a serious question because I'm not sure if there is a way back. Ricky Bullock says, our emergency room has 0 wait time, no one in the waiting area, and we have one of the longest wait times in the state, hearing the same report from other hospitals. Well, yeah, I wonder about that because it is known to a lot of people that hospitals are a bad place to go. If you want to stay away from infections, stay away from hospitals. I don't know. This brings to something to mind. That Halloween sexy nurse outfits seem to be the most popular for women. I've already associated hospitals with sickness and death, and I do not find that very sexy. But this commingling of sex and death, very, very popular. Well, as of 3 days ago, 4,000 police officers with the New York Police Department called in sick. Again, Anarcho-Tyranny. The policemen and women, they're not coming in. And they're not arresting people anymore. And the jails are being emptied. And Dennis Dixon, third from the left, I'm looking at heavily overweight people, heavily overweight. Officers are scared out there. Coronavirus hits U.S. police. West Bloomfield, Michigan, more than a fifth of Detroit's police force is quarantined. 2 officers have died from coronavirus and at least 39 have tested positive, including the chief of police. With a 2,200 person department, that has meant officers working doubles and swapping between units to fill patrols. And everyone has their temperature checked before they start work. An increasing number of police departments around the country are watching their ranks get sick as the number of coronavirus cases explodes across the U.S. The growing tally raises questions about how laws can and should be enforced during the pandemic, and about how departments will hold up as the virus spreads among those whose work puts them at increased risk of infection. I don't think it's too far to say that the officers are scared out there, said Manny Ramirez, president of Fort Worth Police Officers Association. So, law enforcement, is it a calling or is it merely a job? I don't know. It seems to me that for most policemen, it's simply a job. As I said before, one associates a certain degree of risk with being a law enforcement officer. But what we see from law enforcement officers is that no, they are not interested in risk. And risk is something which apparently can be done away with. I mean, on the one hand, people are not supposed to be on the streets, but if the police aren't there, and if the police are not even going to, charge you for breaking the law, that would seem to be a very powerful enticement for people to be out in the streets breaking the law. I suppose as it gets warmer, we'll see how that works out, and it should be fairly warm in America's major cities, the East Coast and the Midwest, by the end of April. We have a cancel culture victim due to coronavirus. Business Network parts ways with Trish Regan days after primetime host was put on hiatus for saying coronavirus was a scam to impeach Trump. She said in a statement that she wants to focus on my family. You think they'd come up with a better excuse? Because spending more time with the family, that means that you've been canned, or it means that you've realized that nobody likes you, or nobody wants to vote for you, that sort of thing. Fox Business has parted ways with Trish. I don't know where it should be pronounced Regan, but she may pronounce it Reagan. We thank her for her contributions to the network over the years and wish her continued success in her future endeavors. Oh man, you ever got a kiss-off letter like that from an employer? I have. It's really galling to read. Wow, apparently I was pretty good at this job. Yes, so why did you fire me then? We will continue our reduced live primetime schedule for the foreseeable future in an effort to allocate staff resources to continuous breaking news coverage on the coronavirus crisis. The network also released a statement on Reagan's behalf saying, I've enjoyed my time at Fox and I intend to focus on my family during these troubled times. I'm grateful to my incredible team at Fox Business and for the many opportunities the network has provided me. So on her March 9th, she ripped into the Democrats and the media in her monologue, accused them of drumming up panic over the pandemic in order to criticize Trump and tank the economy so as to hurt his re-election chances. As the graphic next to her on screen read, coronavirus impeachment scam, Reagan hit out at the hate being leveled at the president from the left. We reached a tipping point, she said. The cause of hate being leveled at the president is nearing a crescendo as the Democrats blame him and only him for a virus that originated halfway around the world. And sadly, it seems they care very little for the destruction they are leaving in their wake. Well, I think that's absolutely true. And I've seen many people on Twitter, including prominent members of the media and Democrats, calling for Trump to be impeached again because of this and accusing him of genocide. That's the word they're using, genocide. So what is happening in my country of Canada is pretty quiet in terms of coronavirus, but the hysteria is just as great here as it is in the United States or Britain. So, as you know, I live on an island, and there are advantages to living on an island, particularly at a time of pandemic. There are 67 cases on Vancouver Island and 0 deaths. I'll repeat that, 67 cases. The population is about 800,000 here, and 0 deaths. I was downtown, in downtown Victoria, which is, I don't know, is about 2.5 miles from where I live, over the weekend. About 70% of the businesses are closed. In addition to that, a great many businesses in downtown Victoria are boarded up with plywood as if in anticipation of looters. Again, 67 cases, 0 deaths, and absolute hysteria has been the result. Now, McDonald's was closed, rather to my astonishment. Burger King still open. Let's see, Shoppers Drug Mart and London Drugs were still open. I went to, I thought I would stock up on my supplies of such things, such as zinc, my old friend zinc. And I wasn't able to get zinc at Shoppers Drug Mart or London Drugs downtown because they're only letting so many people into the store. So there was a lineup of, I would reckon, half an hour to an hour. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. So actually, there's a Shoppers Drug Mart across the street, or near close to where I live, and it's nowhere near as big as the one downtown. But I thought, okay, I'll check that out. No lineups, thankfully, but they were all out of zinc. Typically, there's about 3 different kinds of zinc that you'll find in a drugstore, 3 different brands, all gone. I managed to secure this from a Reusable this morning. At Save on Foods, again, long lineups to get in. And it's just, the hysteria is not justified by the data, but in times like this, hysteria is its own justification. In Newfoundland, they have 1 death. Newfoundland is an island, like Vancouver Island. And again, the hysteria is just as much there as it is anywhere else. The numbers in Canada, they're simply not very high at all. As of March the 30th, 7,437. It's not that high, but we've decided to crash our economy nonetheless. Perhaps more worrisome is that I've been told that the 2 meatpacking plants in Canada have already been closed. And there is a problem with inspectors that what if COVID has been, if any of the employees have tested positive for COVID, then they're not going in. They're refusing to do their jobs. A very strange story from the Globe and Mail 4 days ago. The federal government is shutting the doors to all of its 317 Service Canada centres where people can apply in person for employment insurance, old age security, pension benefits, and passports on Friday after employees en masse refused to work. An honest-to-God rebellion. The government bent to pressure Thursday evening from the Canadian Employment and Immigration Union, which represents 17,000 Service Canada employees, including 3,360 who staff the centres. I wonder if they will ever reopen. Are the schools ever going to reopen? You know, this is not as bizarre a question as you might imagine. Are sports stadiums ever going to reopen? Because, you know, at schools, sports stadiums, music concerts, there's all of these people spreading disgusting germs and viruses. And is that tolerable? Well, if one believes in the matriarchal harm-based model, no, it's not tolerable at all. How can we allow people to spread germs and viruses to other people? The province of Alberta is dying as we speak. The oil price falls below $20 US a barrel, its lowest since 2002. Now, of course, the oil is going to be used eventually, and in some time, I'm not going to make a guess as to when, there are going to be severe shortages of oil, and the price will spike at $150 a barrel or $200 a barrel, something like that. When exactly, I don't know. But here's the big news for Canada. The type of oil from Canada's oil sands is known as Western Canada Select, and it too is getting hammered down another $1.41 to $3.82 a barrel. That there is no way that any money can be made selling oil from Alberta now, and a lot of people in Canada hate Alberta, and they're having a good time. Petrochemical industry is about 18-19% of federal government revenues. If Alberta goes down, it is taking the rest of Canada. So, COVID-19 carelessness. Which Canadians say pandemic threat is overblown, and how are they behaving? In turn, this is from the Angus Reid Institute. I have to commend Angus Reid himself for saying, talking about the numerator versus denominator question, that we do not have the denominator, so it's rather pointless discussing how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions allegedly are going to die of coronavirus. Those who say the threat of COVID-19 is overblown are less concerned about personally contracting the virus or it happening to someone in their household than those who say the threat is serious. Political partisanship correlates with opinion on the seriousness of the pandemic. Those unconvinced are far more likely to have voted for the Conservative Party in the 2019 federal election. Those who see the threat of COVID-19 as overblown are also likely to say things will get back to normal more quickly than those who say the threat is serious. So apparently 12% of Canadians believe that the threat of a coronavirus outbreak in Canada has overblown. But I will add the caveat here that we are polling is to a large extent manufactured consent. The media tells people what to think, or the pollsters themselves tell people what to think, and so they think it, or at least they pretend to think it. So those who believe that it's overblown, it's curious that the older you are, the more likely you are to believe that it is overblown. And amongst the youngest cohort, they all seem to believe that it is not overblown at all. And I guess they have been, they've been well trained by their teachers to believe everything the experts tell them. One will live, one will die. How Canada is preparing for tough coronavirus choices. Ooh, let's get into some Sophie's Choice porn. That sounds fun, doesn't it? There is one ventilator, 2 people. The first person is a 12-year-old with COVID-19, the disease caused by the new coronavirus. The second person is 74 and has COVID-19 too, but he's an infectious disease doctor and an expert in vaccine development. Neither is breathing very well, and the window to choose who gets the machine, which mechanically helps patients struggling to breathe, is closing quickly. Unlike other forms of treatment, experts note the decision about initiating or terminating mechanical ventilation is often truly a life or death choice. So says Timothy Christie, a medical ethicist. You have the 12-year-old, the 74-year-old, and a choice. One is going to live, and one is going to die. Who do you save? Well, that sounds like a movie of the week, doesn't it? Save the child or save the doctor is the first scenario that Christie, Regional Director of Ethics Services for Horizon Health Network in New Brunswick. Yeah, New Brunswick, eh? How is New Brunswick faring? How many people have died in New Brunswick? Well, let's check. These numbers are a day old. Oh, 0! 0 people have died in the province of New Brunswick. But let's have the Sophie's Choice porn anyway, because quite frankly, a lot of people are enjoying this. Oh, Newfoundland and Saskatchewan have recorded their first COVID-19 related deaths. Jason Kenney, my old friend, is telling everyone in Alberta, which has a population of 4.4 million people, to stay home. Everyone should stay home. There are 3 deaths in Alberta. 3! But everyone's got to stay home. So, what else is happening in the world? What's going to change because of this? Will China survive? Fighting erupts at Chinese bridge between Hubei, Jingzi provinces. Police in China clashed with each other and with people trying to cross a bridge between Hubei and Jiangxi provinces, according to footage uploaded to Chinese social media on Friday. I have seen some of this footage. It is pretty wild. Turning over police vans and the like. The skirmish was filmed 2 days after the Chinese authorities lifted travel restrictions against Hubei residents. China has resumed operation of trains and buses out of the coronavirus-hit province. On Friday, the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, was reclassified as a medium risk zone after being assigned a high-risk rating since January. Distrust of China's numbers and safety ratings may run high forever. When Qingzi police blocked people leaving Hubei, Hubei police fought back. On Twitter, Chinese Australian dissidents and artist Bedukao said Friday the conflict started due to police from different provinces fighting for jurisdiction on checking COVID-19. The artist also described the incident as a riot. Decouple. Are we going to decouple from China? Golly, I sure hope so. Here's a piece from the Quint from Francesca Marino. Enough is enough. Not only are Italy as a nation and Italians as a people affected by the coronavirus pandemic, but we also have to face the frankly disgusting, given the situation, Chinese propaganda. It started with our incomparable foreign minister, Luigi Di Maio, nicknamed Gigino, sharing enthusiastic posts on his Facebook account of Chinese doctors and Chinese medical supplies arriving in Italy. Maybe since he does not know English, and even his Italian isn't very good, he could not really understand what was going on, but then a well-concerted campaign spread, again via Facebook, with Italians, meaning mostly Chinese trolls in disguise, sharing posts praising China and their help to Italy. The strategy became clear a few days later. Zhao Lijian, well known for being the Gafoor of China, he was posted for years in Pakistan at the Chinese embassy and entrusted with a very aggressive CPEC propaganda, posted a clip on Twitter and wrote, "In Rome, with the Chinese anthem playing, some Italians chanted Grazie Cina on their balconies and their neighbors applauded along. Against COVID-19, humanity lives in a community with a shared future. Italy is a heroic nation. At this trying moment, Chinese stand with Italy." Yeah, sure they do. I'm looking at this video that he posted. My word, it's polluted. The audio of the clip is clearly a fake and not even a good one. There's talk about lawsuits and war damages. There are also reports coming in from all over the world of, oh, the Chinese are letting us have some of their masks, and 50% of them are not working. I've made a little list, and none of them will be missed. You know what I'm not going to miss? Reusable grocery bags. Tim Newman from Wales has been writing extensively on this. I talked about it several times on Luke Ford's live stream. That one, these reusable bags are not better for the environment because they require a lot more in terms of inputs than throwaway plastic bags. Two, reusable grocery bags are disease vectors, which has been known for years. And at my local Save on Foods and at my local government liquor store, they have been banned. And now, no reusable bags, say BC health officials in advice to grocery stores amid COVID-19. How about that? City of Victoria banned plastic bags, one-time plastic bags. This was overturned in court, but the stores had already shifted over to a new system and they were unwilling to shift back until now. And I'm hoping that coronavirus, this is the end of the reusable bag stupidity. What else? Immigration. Canada's not doing it anymore, except for temporary foreign workers. Well, here's a question to ask. What possible justification could there be for immigration in the near future? And by the near future, I'm thinking 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, 10 years, because we've destroyed our economies. We've willfully destroyed our economies We're looking at what, 30% employment? How could there possibly be any justification for immigration? I don't see how the United States could possibly need more than, 5,000 immigrants in a year. If we're talking about Nobel scientists, in medicine, chemistry, or whatever, that would be one thing. But apart from people like that, I don't see any justification for immigration to the United States, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, etc. There's no jobs for these migrants. They were already unlikely to get jobs, and the likelihood of them getting jobs now is very low indeed. And they're not going to be very happy about that, are they? Well, at least some of them, those ones who want to have jobs. And of course, it was a mistake to bring them in the first place. But the Trudeau government has set targets of 341,000 permanent residents in 2020, followed by increases to 351,000 in 2021 and 361,000 in 2022. The Liberals have a plan, which is they are going to attempt to shunt the newcomers into the countryside. Now, the Charter of Rights, satirically named, guarantees mobility rights. The government has for a long time said, oh, we're going to place you here, and the people show up, and then they drive straight to Vancouver, or they drive straight to Toronto, or they drive straight to Montreal. They want to be where their own people are. But the Liberal government wants to destroy the Conservative Party once and for all by making it impossible for Conservatives to be elected anywhere. And maybe that is coming to an end. It certainly should. Conservative immigration critic Peter Kent, himself a naturalized Canadian, supports the government's current move, but wonders if immigration should be kept on pause if unemployment levels rise as high as expected. He has to wonder about that. Kent emphasized that he fully supports immigration as an economic benefit from Canada. Well, he should look into the literature because it is not an economic benefit, even without counting the vast social costs associated with immigration. We need a lot more people, Kent said. You see how stupid our politicians are? We do not need a lot more people. Why? Oh, because population density in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal isn't high enough? Is that the idea? Is the idea that there are still too many, trees and green spaces near populated areas in Vancouver? Oh, yes. Who else are we not going to miss? A story from CNN Business. 2020 was supposed to be a banner year for digital media. BuzzFeed, Group 9, and Vice each indicated that this year they would be profitable. A long elusive goal for an industry bedeviled by diminishing ad dollars. But no one could have predicted that a global health crisis would hit just as business was picking up. BuzzFeed CEO Jonah Peretti told staffers in a memo this week that the company had been knocked off track because of coronavirus. Though we were well on track to be profitable this year, the impact of the coronavirus on the global economy will almost certainly cause the company to lose money, even as we take aggressive action to control costs. BuzzFeed has instituted pay cuts and scaled back on travel and hiding. According to the memo, which was obtained by CNN Business, Peretti will not take a salary for the rest of the year. A record-shattering 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment last week after residents in many parts of the country were ordered to stay home and practice social distancing. At least 100 people in local newsrooms in the U.S. lost their jobs in March. By Friday, that number shot up to 300 people as the impact of coronavirus continues to roil newspapers and digital media companies. Well, as far as newspapers go, I'll just repeat that my local newspaper, the Victoria Times Colonist, they give it away. They give it away in my apartment building. They bring about 10 copies a day, and they're there in the lobby for anyone who wants them. Nobody wants them. They give them away at McDonald's. Well, they did when McDonald's was still open. And apart from people, well, in their 70s and 80s, no one is interested. How many people does the news media need in order to make up stories about the Trump White House or give recaps about the latest episode of The Bachelor or The Bachelorette? Well, obviously, it is a lot less than the number currently being employed. Let's see, Edward Snowden on Monday warned that high-tech surveillance measures governments use to fight the outbreak of COVID-19 could have a long-lasting impact. That's according to an interview with the Copenhagen International Documentary Film Festival. The US government, for instance, is reportedly in talks with tech companies like Facebook and Google to use anonymized location data from phones to help track the spread of COVID-19. While some say the measure could be a helpful tool for health authorities to track the virus, others have expressed concerns about their information being shared with the government. Snowden, a former National Security Agency contractor who leaked documents about mass surveillance activities, said governments can extend the access they have to people's personal information during a crisis and use it to monitor their actions. During this pandemic, for example, governments might say they're worried about public health and could send an order to every fitness tracker to look at measures like pulse and heart rate and then demand access to that kind of activity. After the virus is gone and the data is still available to them, governments can use new causes like terrorist threats to justify continually gathering and analyzing people's data, he said. They don't need terrorist threats. They just need a virus threat. That there are constantly new viruses. And there's always a flu season. And so they will argue that coronavirus snuck up on us and we can't allow that to happen. So everyone will be surveilled at all times. We cannot afford personal privacy anymore. Do you want people to die? Well, you don't, do you? Okay, so there's no more privacy, and you should be bloody grateful that we, let you get away with what you get away with now. The film industry, is that going to survive? In the sense of people going to theaters. I don't think that it's possible for the authorities to get away with every single other person on earth is a direct, possibly, fatal threat to you. Oh, that's over now. But weren't you talking about the virus coming back in fall? Yeah, you can go back to doing what you were doing, but isn't that too risky? Because, safety first. Why would I want to go to a movie theater? There's always someone coughing in there. Whenever you go to a concert, there's always a few people coughing away. I mean, you can't be too careful. This is from Box Office Mojo. With the rise of global concerns over COVID-19, the film industry is just one of many in a state of upheaval. Announced today, that was March 17th, both AMC and Regal will close all U.S. theaters. And I was looking at the grosses. Oh, let's see. Latest dailies. Onward made $33,296. Yeah, there are several $1 million. It made $36,296. The Invisible Man made $21,800. Well, I suppose the movie theaters could say, people can stream this stuff. Actually, I don't know whether the capacity exists to move to a completely streaming model. But some people, still like to go and watch movies on the big screen. And I don't know, maybe that is over. Oh, yes. And another thing that won't be missed, celebrities, particularly filthy, stinking, rich celebrities who cannot quit posting about their good fortune. David Geffen sparks backlash for flaunting his self-quarantine from a $590 million super yacht. Geffen, founder of Geffen Records and co-founder of DreamWorks Pictures, took to Instagram on Saturday morning to post images from his luxury yacht. Sunset last night, isolated in the Grenadines, avoiding the virus. I'm hoping everybody is staying safe, Geffen wrote to his nearly 84,000 followers. The images included 2 wide shots of the Rising Sun yacht, as well as one of the luxurious main deck. Critics piled on the mogul for the tone-deaf Instagram post. The AV Club published the headline, "Hey, Poors, David Geffen wants to show you his yacht." The View co-host Meghan McCain Blasted Geffen saying, David Geffen is worth $8 billion. For God's sake, help this country get ventilators, our health workers masks, and the medical supplies they need. Oh no, just stay on your fucking yacht Instagramming. This is just shameful and grotesque. David Geffen writing out the virus in a yacht made of ventilators. Extremism expert Mark Pitcabbage quipped. David Geffen could have donated that yacht to NYC to be used as a makeshift hospital. Yeah. How about you just, David Geffen just keeps silent? I really think that it's in David Geffen's interest to seek out publicity. I won't go into the details why, but best for him to keep his wealth on the down low. We have simply OD'd on celebrity coverage since the coronavirus panic began, the sanitary dictatorship, because the celebs are at home and they're all in isolation and they're also very sad. They're also very lonely, and they're also very concerned for the rest of us. Well, no, they aren't. Their concern is that they're going to be forgotten because they're not making TV shows now. They're not shooting movies anymore. It'd be pretty risky trying to get, paps to take photos of you, because then you'd be breaking social isolation rules. Jim Kunstler, okay, he is always, well, he has for a long time been looking at the big picture. He writes this morning, one thing will be pretty clear, that the folks in charge of things gave trillions of dollars to Wall Street, while tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of COVID-19 survivors got wiped out financially with gargantuan medical bills. Do you think the charge master part of the hospital routine will just stop doing its thing during this emergency? The billings will continue, just as the proverbial beatings will continue until morale improves. And he's written about this before, but I still find it shocking that, I know a little bit about the U.S. health system and how expensive it is. But he reports that only a few years ago, I went in for an ordinary hip replacement. A month or so later, I got the hospital billing statement. One of the line items went like this: room and board, 36 hours, $23,000, $482.79. That was just for the hospital bed and maybe 4 lousy hospital meals, not the surgery or the meds or anything else. All that was billed extra. And he makes a very good point, which I haven't seen anyone else make, that people are going to go into hospital, and if they're in an ICU unit, how many tens of thousands of dollars can they expect to be charged? He writes that do you think $20 a barrel oil is a boon to the happy motoring way of life? It's going to at least bankrupt most of the companies producing shale oil, and that's where way more than half of our production came from in recent years. How many ordinary Americans will be able to finance car payments now? To say suburbia will not be functioning too well mere months from now is a merciful way to put it. The big cities will not recover from the trauma and stigma of the virus, but that is only the beginning of their problems. What exactly will the suffering poor of the ghettos do under orders to remain cooped up until the end of April? These are people who are unlikely to have laid in supplies ahead of time, and a month from now, they are sure to be very hungry. How will the big cities be able to manage their infrastructures with municipal bonds massively failing? How will they provide social services when tax revenues are down to a trickle? The answer is they won't manage any of this. They grew too big and too complex. Now they will have to get smaller, and the process will not be pretty. What will the business of America be after COVID-19? If we're lucky, it will be growing food and working at many of the activities that support it, moving it, storing it, selling it, making an order of smaller scaled farm machinery, including machines that can be used with horses and oxen, breeding the animals. I'm not kidding. Growing food happens in the countryside where the fields and pastures are. There are towns there too, associated with the farming, where much of the business of farming and the activities that support it transact. Now, I don't see, it's possible that Kunstler could be right about this, but I don't see a return to an agricultural based society in the United States or anywhere else without a massive die-off. And by massive, I'm talking 30, 40, 50% of the population. Meanwhile, there's still a presidential election going on, and the Democrats understand that their candidate, the one that they decided it couldn't be Bernie, and Pete Buttigieg was given a swing of the bat, and he whiffed. Well, he kind of sort of won the Iowa caucus, although we're never going to get results on that. Have you seen Pete Buttigieg lately? He's grown a beard. He was photographed hanging out at the toy section, the kiddie section of a department store. Is that a good look? I don't know. You tell me. Anyway, Joe Biden is a dud. Wow. Is there anyone else who could take over? Ooh. How about sexy Andrew Cuomo? Bloomberg writes, while Americans are stuck at home, the Democrat dominating the airwaves to counter President Donald Trump's messaging about the coronavirus is not the one seeking to replace him in the Oval Office. It's New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. And that's causing some daydreaming for political junkies with time on their hands. Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, is also holding daily briefings. He is. That are scoring high marks for empathy. They are. Sound advice about physical and mental health from that guy, and for offering a solid plan about what he would do if he were not a private citizen waiting out the virus at his home in Delaware. I seem to recall that Emerald Robinson commented on this, on just how wildly popular his briefings are. Was that like 600? 600 people watched the last one. As she says, yeah, here we go. Joe Biden did a live stream town hall event last week, and 600 people watched it. Not 600,000, not 6,000, 600 viewers. I think it's a lock for Joe Biden for reasons that I explained last week, because it takes time to turn around the ship. And all of these people have declared for Joe Biden, and they're all looking for jobs. They've made a commitment. And if it's somebody else, then these people are going to have to go back to the end of the line, and they are not going to be happy about that as well. Amid a global pandemic, Cuomo's near daily briefings about New York's response to COVID-19 have become the Democratic counterpoint to Trump's appearances that most Americans see. And unlike Biden, he's able to actually put his plans into action. Well, yeah, it's funny that the received wisdom for decades is that the best candidates for president are governors, because they have had executive experience, whereas senators, no executive experience. Of course, there are often senators who in the past been governors, but we see with the Democrats, you have two senators running against each other, which is not the traditional way of doing things. Cuomo, that's Andrew, not Fredo. He's endorsed Biden. He was a U.S. Housing Secretary in the Clinton administration as the oldest son of beloved Democratic New York Governor Mario Cuomo, who dallied with running for president in the 1980s and 1990s. And if that wasn't enough of a Democratic political dynasty, Cuomo, 62, was once married to a Kennedy. Granddad, what's a Kennedy? The hashtag President Cuomo trended on Twitter last week. Musings about Cuomo as a wild card nominee have come from everywhere on the left. You noticing a pattern here, what I'm going to say here? Everywhere on the left, including New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, MSNBC host Rachel Maddow, who called him president of the coronavirus response, and a writer at the feminist website Jezebel, Rebecca Fishbein, who headlined her piece, "Help, I Think I'm in Love with Andrew Cuomo." Yep, we're living in a matriarchy. And ain't it grand? Biden campaign adamantly denies allegation of sexual assault. This is from Fox News, and the URL says, Biden campaign denies false allegations of sexual assault. How do they know that they're false? A woman, Tara Reid, there was a hashtag trending last week, I believe Tara, or I stand with Tara, something like that. Why did this woman come? Why did she wait so long? This happened in 1993. This is 27 years ago. Joe Biden, yeah, he was a senator. Robert Packwood was a senator, and he got brought down by exactly this sort of thing. Reid has come forward before last year when multiple women emerged claiming inappropriate touching by Biden. Reid at the time claimed Biden put his hands on her shoulders and rubbed his fingers up and down her neck, but was unable to gain traction on her story, aside from an article in a local newspaper. But this week, Reid told a former Graphic account with different and more serious details, raising the allegation to the level of sexual assault. So she's changed her story. The story was 26 years old when she first started detailing it, and now she has changed it significantly because everyone knows that Joe Biden is always touching women. He's always rubbing their shoulders and sniffing their hair, and not just women, too, little girls as well. However, any Republican or Republican sympathizer who is accused of this sort of thing, for instance, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, indelible in the hippocampus. Well, don't you believe women? You have to believe women. Come on, believe women. So I suppose on that principle, Tara Reid and others must be believed. I mean, did these people really think that Me Too wasn't going to eviscerate them as well? Because it seems to be, eviscerating more of their people than of the other guys. From The Intercept, which first highlighted these charges, Time's Up said it could not fund a Me Too allegation against Joe Biden, citing its nonprofit status and his presidential run. And they're talking about Anita Hill again. Now, I suppose to a few feminists, the name Anita Hill still means something, but to the vast majority of Americans, they don't know who Anita Hill is. This is ancient history. So, yes, the retailing of this story, Lucy Flores alleged that Biden had inappropriately sniffed her hair and kissed the back of her head as she waited to go on stage at a rally in 2014. Is that it? Is that all you got? Yes, it is inappropriate, but is it really that horrifying? But anyway, the initial reporting of Flores' charges brought a wave of attention on her, along with accusations she was doing the bidding of Russian President Vladimir Putin. So what does Joe Rogan think? Now, I suppose the coronavirus panic is, very shocking. Well, obviously it's very shocking. But Joe Rogan being a powerful political influencer, I still can't shake my knowledge of him as being the least funny person on news radio. But in any event, according to The Hill, podcast host and comedian Joe Rogan hit former Vice President Joe Biden on Friday, declaring President Trump was going to eat him alive in a potential general election matchup. The comments from Rogan, a controversial supporter of Senator Bernie Sanders, comes as the Democrats grow increasingly anxious that Biden is losing ground to Trump as the nation deals with an unprecedented national crisis in the coronavirus pandemic. The National Interest says, no one cares about Joe Biden anymore. From Hunter Durensis, it's critical for Biden's campaign going into the summer to recapture an appearance of capability if he is going to be able to challenge President Trump on the merits of his crisis response. Does that seem likely? I don't think so. Coronavirus is killing the Biden campaign and making him look like a fool, says Jay Cost in the New York Post. Trump has dominated the news cycles over the last 3 weeks, and his administration has been a whirling dervish of activity. Um, I I think what impresses most people is that there's Trump at his news conference, and he's at the White House, and he's with all these other people, and they seem to be going about their jobs. You know, they're not wearing masks, they're not in hazmat suits, they don't seem to be visibly trembling. And you compare that to Joe Biden, who is, speaking from his inner sanctum in his Delaware home. Um, yeah, briefly, I wanted to talk about this piece from March the 26th in the Wall Street Journal by Walter Russell Mead, which I think is significant because it indicates that the political firmament is shifting profoundly. The coronavirus may make Trump stronger. Gallup finds 60% of voters approve of his handling of the crisis. As usual, the establishment is clueless. This is not what his critics expected. At a 49% overall job approval in the latest Gallup poll, and with 60% approval of the way he's handling the coronavirus epidemic, Trump's standing with voters has improved even as the country closed down and the stock market underwent a historic meltdown. One reason Trump's opponents have had such a hard time damaging his connection with voters is that they still don't understand why so many Americans want a wrecking ball presidency. Beyond attributing Trump's support to a mix of racism, religious fundamentalism, and profound ignorance, the president's establishment opponents in both parties have yet to grasp the depth and intensity of the populist energy that animates his base and the Bernie Sanders movement. The majority of the electorate is this deeply alienated from the establishment, and I'm looking at at Instapundit. They covered out a big chunk about this, but there are polling numbers showing that something close to 60% of Americans no longer believe in the standard consensus. This cannot be dismissed as bigotry and ignorance. There are solid grounds for doubting the competence and wisdom of America's self-proclaimed expert class. What is so intelligent and enlightened, populists ask about a foreign policy establishment that failed to perceive that U.S. trade policies were promoting the rise of a hostile communist superpower with the ability to disrupt supplies of essential goods in a national emergency? What competence have the military and political establishments shown in almost 2 decades of tactical success and strategic impotence in Afghanistan? What became of that intervention in Libya? What was the net result of all the fine talk in the Bush and Obama administrations about building democracy in the Middle East? On domestic policy, the criticism is equally trenchant and deeply felt. Many voters believe that the U.S. establishment has produced a healthcare system that is neither affordable nor universal. Higher education saddles students with increasing debt while leaving many graduates woefully unprepared for good jobs in the real world. People aren't going to be graduating, are they? Or a lot of people are not going to be graduating. Perhaps this will lead to an end, or at least a lessening of credentialism, which would be a very good thing. So Mead writes, the culture of social promotion and participation trophies is not populist field confined to U.S. kindergartens and elementary schools. Judging by performance, they conclude that people rise in the American establishment by relentless virtue signaling, by going along with conventional wisdom, however foolish, and by forgiving the failures of others and having their own overlooked in turn. The blame game playing out over how the president has handled the coronavirus epidemic reflects the dynamics of this struggle. The establishment's massive decades-long failure to think through the consequences of empowering communist China and creating a trading relationship that, among other things, left the U.S. dependent on Beijing for pharmaceuticals is a much less excusable and more consequential error than anything Donald Trump has done in 2020, and it has a direct bearing on the mess we are in. Now, I'm wondering what Trump's endgame is here. He could say at the end of April that, okay, it's back to work. And this was blown wildly out of proportion by the experts. That's a risky move for him to take because it would be a confession that he was bamboozled by these experts, and he is a man who is not supposed to be bamboozled by experts. I suppose it would be possible to construct a version of that argument which was less weak, but perhaps he'll just go straight for China's jugular. I mean, their behavior from the beginning of this affair to the present day has been absolutely intolerable. They only enjoy the position that they do in the world economy because we have let them have it. How long ago was it that they joined the World Trade Organization? Do you remember a world before people were hypnotized by Chinese crap selling at Walmart? Was the world really so bereft before everyone had to go to Walmart to buy Chinese tat? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I had not heard of until today a popular internet personality called iDubbbz. And he has 3 B's in his name and a Z at the end. He's not very prepossessing to look at. He looks like a weak young man wearing large glasses. According to Know Your Meme, a very valuable and often hilarious site, iDubbbz is the YouTube handle of one Ian Carter, an American vlogger and social media critic best known for his Kickstarter crap and Content Cop web series. In addition to producing original video content, iDubbbz has made great appearances in collaboration with other YouTube personalities, most notably Filthy Frank and MaxMofo. As of February 2017, iDubbbz TV has more than 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube. So, Content Cop, Kickstarter crap, bad unboxing, which are parodies of unboxing videos. iDubbbz's stage persona and style of humor has been celebrated by his fans as provocative, ironic, and highly satirical, while his critics have slammed his frequent use of racial and homophobic slurs for comedy as lowbrow and offensive. Okay. I understand that his channel was demonetized, which may have something to do with this controversy, which is now roiling the web. iDubbbz has a girlfriend, and her name is Anissa Jamha. That is a very strange name, indeed. She is a very attractive young woman, I must say. And she's not all tatted up, as far as I can see. I am not seeing tons of piercings and the like. She has, I see one picture of her on her Twitter feed here where she's got this horror makeup, you know, like she's a zombie or she's been slashed or something. And she has the ring through the septum. That seems to be a temporary ring. But again, long story short, a very attractive, rather sweet-looking woman. She announced a few weeks ago that she's going to be on OnlyFans. As far as I can tell, OnlyFans is it's a site where you make special relationships with people. And how do you, let's say, I'll just read from Wikipedia. I don't want to screw this up. OnlyFans is a social media service based in London. Creators run a paid subscription content service with ways for them to build relationships and provide exclusive content to their subscribers or fans. It is popular in the adult entertainment industry, but also hosts content creators from other genres, such as physical fitness experts. The New York Times commended OnlyFans for helping change adult entertainment work by giving control back to the performers to earn money for the content they create. So, iDubbbz's girlfriend is providing content for men to pleasure themselves to, and apparently iDubbbz seems to be down with this. Also, iDubbbz seems to be taking pictures, perhaps video, so that men can pay money to strange women for pictures for media that they can pleasure themselves to. This is a kind of virtual cuckoldry, isn't it? One would have thought that this would be extraordinarily embarrassing to admit, you know. I mean, she's using her real name, assuming that Anissa Jamha is her real name and not something, you know, some Scrabble pieces put together. Let's say February 21st. I've always been a thought, but I used to be hick flavored. Yeah, okay. I'm just looking through these pictures. Oh, here's one of her looking very thoughtful. You know, very thoughtful indeed. Oh, back to practicing digital art. Sailor Moon. Yeah, let's get that pedo vibe going. I don't know. It's how can you have a girlfriend who is okay, we need money or I need money, so I'm going to go into the porn business, but I'm not doing anything with anyone else. So I mean, how could anyone possibly object? Don't you want everyone in the world to see your girlfriend naked, possibly doing things with herself? What kind of red-blooded American man wouldn't want that to happen? Now, obviously, it's OnlyFans, right? And so men are going to pay for this media, and then they're going to upload it to the internet so the whole world can see it. I mean, she knows that's what's going to happen, right? But this is the world we live in, the world of libido dominandi. Teen Vogue, which may be the most reprehensible publication in the English language. March 27th, 15 best vibrators on Amazon 2020. Yeah, for teens. Okay. Best-selling vibrators on Amazon. Tracy's dog. I'm not even going to read the rest of that. Paloquet G-Spot Rabbit Vibrator. No, I'm not going to read this one either. Yeah. Do they get kickbacks for this? I wonder, because there's links to Amazon there, direct links. Do they get a percentage of what they sell? Okay, what else do we have going on with Teen Vogue? LifeSite reports March the 26th. In mid-March 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Teen Vogue, which is a troubling history with teenagers and sexual exploitation, posted a Snapchat Discover story about sexting under the guise of helping teenagers sustain their relationships from a distance. In case Teen Vogue has forgotten what a teen is, it is a person aged between 13 and 19 years, synonyms: adolescent, youth, minor, juvenile. A person under the age of full legal responsibilities, definition of minor. Encouraging teens to sext is encouraging minors to create and distribute child pornography, which is more accurately referred to as child sex abuse material, CSAM. Also, online predators use social media platforms to pose as peers and groom children to send them sexually explicit material that they can then distribute and or use to blackmail the child into other forms of sexual exploitation. No less than the health and well-being of our youth is at stake. Well, no question about that, but our elite has apparently decided that children must be sexualized. And the more sexualized they are, the better. I was at one of the other sites and something about something Ariana Grande. Ariana Grande looks like a 12-year-old. The fact that she is being touted as one of the leading sex symbols in the world is disgusting, because I fail to see how any adult male could find her sexually attractive, again, because she looks like a child. And okay, let's take one more look at the chat. Yeah, peasants with pitchforks. Maybe that's going to be one of the results of the coronavirus panic. I'm looking forward to it myself. If you'd asked me a few weeks ago, I would have thought, well, you talk about peasants with pitchforks, you're looking at a revolutionary situation, and I'm not looking forward to that level of turmoil, but we're going to get the revolutionary situation anyway. So let's bring on the peasants with pitchfork. What in the hell has happened to the stream? Have we gone gutter? they talking about what I said or what other people were saying? Dawn from Beyond says, I was shocked when I checked out Teen Vogue online. All her stuff is reposted on Kiwi Farms. Oh, this is that the woman with the strange name, iDubbbz's girlfriend, presumably. I'll have a bucket of the Colonel, KMG, says Vox Days. Jonathan Pohl has a comment that I won't repeat. Yeah, maybe that is the future, but we seem to have rather topped out, you know? Alex Large says, by today's standards, she's above average. Not that I call her very attractive myself. Well, the very fact that, you know, that she is not covered with tattoos and not covered with piercings is, well, it makes her stand out, certainly. Ricky Bullock says, no, it's virtual pimping if Dubs is taking the picture, but he's still beta for, and I'm not going to, for buying her tits. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm going to wrap up the show now. I'm going to say this could be the penultimate show for the time being because I'm being kicked out of my room. Apparently, I have to be out by the 6th, but my broadband is going to be turned off after the 31st. That's the latest I've heard. What's going to happen to me? I don't know. I don't have any place to live. I may have to go to a hotel, assuming that I could arrange a very good rate. It was all working out so well, you know. It looked like I was safe right through till July when I turned 65 on July the 2nd. And that means mandatory Gibbs, assuming, of course, that old age pension and old age security still exist in July. Maybe they won't. But in any event, I will be back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific for what, as I say, might be my final show for some time. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, for listening. I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like to contribute, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, thank you so much, and I'll be back tomorrow.